Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you all for being here. Again, our webinar this afternoon is called Literacy plus Language plus Science equals Action. And my name is Jean Kofelt-Berletic. Whoops. Our objectives for the afternoon are to become familiar with the goals, contexts, and key themes of the California ELA-ELD framework, to explore how these pieces fit together in a real classroom context, and to examine a process one teacher uses for planning and teaching in this way. So I would like to send out a poll and find out about how familiar you are with the ELA-ELD framework. So it looks like we're pretty well split. We have almost half of our group, which is unfamiliar with the framework, and several of you who are very familiar or familiar with the framework. So we're going to spend a little time looking at it and talking about the implementation. Then we're going to look at some classroom examples. Here are the results of our poll. Our context for what we'll be looking at today will focus around the circles of implementation, and this graphic represents the relationship and nature of the many elements necessary to implement ELA and ELD instruction as described in the framework. We will use these elements as our framework today. The first element we'll look at is this outside circle, which are the overarching goals. And with this in mind, we're looking at where students would be when they leave 12th grade. And they would be ready for college, careers, and civic life. They will have attained the capacities of literate individuals. They will have become broadly literate, and they have acquired the skills for living and learning in the 21st century. The next aspect of this graphic is the context for learning in the white field. This is a context in which learning occurs. So how students should be learning is in a context which is motivating, engaging, respectful, integrated, and intellectually challenging. With that in mind, what you see are the key themes of instruction. And these really highlight the interconnections between the ELA and the ELD standards. These key themes are woven throughout the both sets of standards and through the entire framework when we describe how students would learn. These are meaning making, effective expression, language development, content knowledge, and foundational skills. Now, all of this is relatively new. We had new standards, and we had new standards for English language arts. Then we had new standards for ELD. And right along with that, we had new standards for next generation science, or new science standards in California. And I'm telling you this story because this is kind of the context for the work that this teacher did with me. And I had the opportunity a few years ago when these pieces were coming out to offer a sandbox, if you will, for the teachers in my district to become familiar with these. So all of these new standards actually, they give us a lot of challenges, but also offer a lot of opportunities. So to assist our teachers in our district transitioning to the next generation standards, I created some units for them to play around with. And what they really did was provide a context which was integrated in next generation science standards, but gave them a place to see the ELA standards and the ELD standards work together. Now, the teacher that I worked with looked at this and thought this was impossible, and whoever put all of these out at once was a crazy person who had never been in a classroom. And a few months later, she came up with some ideas. So this page is a picture of the website, which you can have access to as well, where she began to play around with this and what she came up with. The other aspect that you may or may not be as familiar with is next generation science standards. So I want to see how familiar you are with that. And let's see, we have another poll. So I'm going to wrap up the polling. These are our results. Most of you, or half of you anyway, are unfamiliar, and a few more are somewhat familiar. So it's not something that most of us work with every day. I have been able to take part in a grant, which was Early Implementers of Next Generation Science Standards. So I've been working with them for about 4 years. And I was seeing a lot of connections between ELA, ELD, and that context, which would be motivating, engaging, intellectually challenging, integrated, and respectful for students, and would really prepare them for 21st century skills. And that was kind of that's really what got me pushed in this direction. So in your handouts that you have, you can look at these standards, and this is one I took a snip of, and you'll see that at the top we have LS1-2. This is a first grade standard to read texts and use media to determine patterns in behavior of parents and offspring that help offspring survive. So, and in that they are also looking at structure and function. So what things do animals have that enable this, and how can we connect that? So with that in mind, all of the samples that we will be looking at are related to this standard, but reflect the ELD and ELA standards as well. So my question is, does science work well for ELD? And this was the question that many people asked when I first put out this material. And I asked them the question back, does science work well for ELD? And what I found out through conversations with teachers, observations in classrooms, and the great wisdom of the teacher that I've been working with for the past couple of years is science works very well for ELD, especially in the lower grades, because it's easy to access, it's very interesting, it is intellectually challenging, and where some kids might not have as much background knowledge as others, they're all kind of in the same boat as starting from scratch, and especially with the new standards. So the kids are super motivated to learn about science, to think about it, talk about it, write about it. So it works great for ELD. And my conversation with the teacher that I worked with, like I said, she thought that it was crazy, that there's no way that kindergartners and first graders would be able to collaboratively draft something or make a presentation together, let alone independently or together, and that everyone was crazy. But she said she went home over Thanksgiving vacation and really thought about it and said to herself, what do my students really need to know? can they do this? And so some of the things she thought, what do I need my students to do with language? She said, I need them to describe orally and in writing. And what's the context? And this is an example, the structures that skunks have to keep themselves safe. So she thought about the standard for science and thought about her ELA and ELD standards and realized that these things really were connected, and she was able to see how those themes in the framework did connect together, and that science was a great vehicle to do that. I'm going to show you an example of a video. This is kind of the end in mind. We will, after we watch this video of the first graders presentation, we will look at all the planning parts that she developed. But this was really her vision. Where will my students be? And this was approximately March of first grade. And out of her class of 24, she has 20 English learners. And in this group, she has students that are ranged from a 2 to a 4, and then an English only student as well. So I'll let you watch this example.
Skunks are mountains. Skunks are omnivores. They have glands. They have kids. They have a hooked nose and get scared. When they get scared, they spray people. They come out at night. They are nocturnal. They are black and white. They have claws.
So that's really what she imagined her students might be able to do. And it's kind of a lofty goal. And she said at first she really didn't know if they could do it, but that's what she wanted them to be able to do. So then she said, okay, how do I get from here to there? And the next part is her process. So what is it she's looking to do with ELD and science? And she said she sketched this out on a napkin at home on Thanksgiving night, and I believe her. I haven't seen it, but this is what she came up with. She has also been taking part in the science grant, and we focus on a 5E lesson plan design. And in the 5E, we have engage, explore, explain, elaboration, and evaluation. And so she lined them up with the ELD units that that I had created. And she thought, how can I use ELD to make science better? And how can I use science to be the fuel for my ELD? So this is what she came up with, of engaging them and front-loading vocabulary, because science really frowns upon front-loading vocabulary. And so she said, okay, then I can do it during ELD. And then she has 3 sets of explore, and those are their days where they're actually interacting and learning, either using videos or actually doing kind of an experiment, if you will. They call it an exploration. And then she connects that during ELD. So they'll do an activity during science class, and then she'll show them a video that clarifies some of the language, and they talk about it using a grammatical form. On day 2, they explore and they do a thinking map, more work with the grammatical form. And day 3, the same thing. They explore some more, and then they work in language groups. Then they begin to write. So she has these students write, illustrate, and then present, and then critique, all in groups. And her process is 8 days. So she gave me this, and I took it and I said, oh, I see what I see here. Do you mind if I, do a little work on it? And she said, oh, absolutely not. So what I came up with was this graphic. And this graphic shows that what she was actually working on was 5E science with integrated ELD. And she spent about 20 minutes doing science each day. And then her designated ELD, which was 30 minutes. And so she had worked with the ELD standards a little bit. And so what we did is I laid out what mode of communication they were using at that time. And we kind of refined the names of the different aspects she was doing. So during the engage, they were really doing interpretive and productive. And they moved through till a lot of their time was focused on collaborative and productive. So their process during 8 days is she front loads vocabulary, they show the video, they do a thinking map, and the thinking map is related to a language function. Then they practice in language groups, which are similar language. So it would be all her twos would be together and work on one particular function or one particular grammatical form, all her threes and so on. And then they get into heterogeneous groups where they research and plan, and then collaboratively write and illustrate, and finally rehearse, present, record, and then they critique it as well. So I'm going to take you through some examples of each part of this process, and you can kind of see how they got to that end in mind that we started with. So with front loading, she selects specific vocabulary that she's going to hold them accountable for at the end of this 8 days. In this case, these are the vocabulary words she focused on. This particular unit is about skunks. So they're learning about what do skunks have that helps them survive. And you can see some examples up at the top that they had already worked on a few different animals. I think it was the polar bear and penguin, etc. So you can see that. And on this day, they practice with some language. They do it. She physically shows them how some things are. She gives them think time. And then they practice it in a more familiar context so that when they get to learn actually about the skunks, they are very familiar with the vocabulary. And these are some pictures of her students on that day. And from this flow that we created, we were able to also come up with language objectives, which is one of the requirements our district has. So her goal on this day is to, with support, students will use new domain-specific words to describe ideas, phenomena, orally using complete sentences. So they have sentence frames they use, and they use it in a more familiar context. On day 2, they will have experienced now a little bit an engage, which is generally a phenomena that they view, and then I had one exploration, and now she's going to add clarity to some of their ideas during ELD, and in this case she's watching a video. So she gives them a purpose for viewing.
New information can we put on our tree map and be listening for, is it true that all skunks look this way? See if you can get that information. Carlos? There it is. Okay, let's.
So in this time, they have a purpose for viewing, and then she showed the video, and then after the viewing, she gives them a prompt for their pair share.
Okay, turn to your partner and say, from this, I want you to talk about 2 things. First of all, what did you learn about skunks eating? And who's the predator to the skunk?
And then here's an example of the actual pair share that 2 students did at that time.
Watch out, because when he lifts his tail, sometimes even
The really interesting thing with this one was the first day when she asked them what they knew about skunks, their feedback was skunks are stinky and they spray, and when you get to the end, keep that in mind when you see what came out at the end, what their outcomes were. So from this point, the students were viewing a video and then asking and answering questions using oral sentence frames. And what you could maybe see was she was asking different types of questions depending upon what she heard as she went around the room. So she differentiated them for the students. The next part they do the next day is they use a thinking map to connect the language, connect what they've been learning to the language function. And in this case, they're describing. Describing is their language function. So during science, they created a circle map about skunks, and now they're classifying that information into what skunks can do, what they have, and what they are. And here's an example of how, and the students in this video, they have the circle map, they've just reviewed it, and it's still posted. And now the students are working with their partners to take that information and classify it. And when I was showing the teacher this video, she said she was so surprised because the classroom being busy, she hadn't realized that the student in the red shirt is 2. And she was so impressed with the language that she was producing. And she said, without the video, she may have missed it. So she was very glad to have that. So they move on from this to day 3, which is reorganizing the text. So they're taking it from their talking, and they're actually going to move into writing. So they contribute to a class discussion where they retell details and use complete sentences and precise vocabulary. And I think that both of these examples really show the use of the precise vocabulary in an authentic context. Day 4 is collaborative language groups, and these videos are wonderful. I would love to show you all of them, and I will share this. You will have access to this presentation so you can see more, but I'm going to highlight one in particular. This one at the top is a group of 4s, students who are EL level 4s. The group at the bottom are EL level 5, and this group is 1, 1, and 2 2s. And the little girl on the right is a 1, and the other girls are 2s. And while you're watching this, I want you to think about both the language that they're using and also the routines that they're using and that are so well practiced in their classroom.
Because I know this is great because they have I just said. I know. No, I will tell her. No, we have to tell her. Black and white and
You gotta love the look on her face.
No. She said by herself now, your turn. I know that I know that dogs have black and white fur, and I know that and white bird, and skunk.
Okay, it goes on from there, but you can see in these groups, these they have differentiated sentence frames. So these students at a level 2 are just beginning to combine words together, and the one student on the right, Najat, she's maybe not ready for that, but Jocelyn is ready to pull her right along with her, and they're just very supportive. So in this day, their language objective is to contribute to small group and partner discussions, retelling details using complete sentences and precise vocabulary, and they're supported by sentence frames. So day 5 is where it turns into the second part of the work, which is their collaborative researching and planning. And this is an example of 3 students actually working together. And she lets them self-select their groups. And she said she was a little wary about it at first, but it has worked out very well. The groups have roles, and some of them will be the writer. Some of them will be, one week they'll be the writer, and the next week they'll be the illustrator. And then they'll have also a pointer. So they have different roles, and then the presenter. So during the presentation, you'll see somebody who has to point to all the details as they are presenting. And this student who is the writer this time is one of her, a student that struggles a lot with literacy. And so you can see how the students are supporting her. Although she is the writer, they all have the responsibility for the writing being accurate enough to be read by the presenter. So. So they're helping each other with spelling, and she's using the word wall, but also the alphabet chart to know which letters to write. And next, so that's their collaborative research and planning. And their objective for this day is students will begin planning to write a short informational text collaboratively with peers. And I teach 5th grade. And when I think of my 5th graders doing that, well, I should say I would have thought with 5th graders even, I don't know how well they could do that collaboratively with peers. After I saw what she was able to do, I think they can pretty much do anything. The next day, day 6, they continue the collaborative writing, and they move on to the writing and to the illustration. So whatever details they've written in their informational writing that they will be sharing, they have to include those in their picture so that when they make their presentation, their picture connects well. So their goal this day is to write a short informational text collaboratively with peers and plan an oral presentation with illustrations. So here are some examples of the presentation groups on day 7.
I know that skunks play, they have glands, and sharp claws, they get scared so fast. Skunks play, I will say, hibernate in the winter, they live in burrows.
So another great example of how the students did with the task. And on this day, they have multiple roles and multiple objectives. So if their group is presenting, their objective is student groups will deliver brief oral presentations. If they are in the audience, students will actively listen to oral presentations and then ask and answer questions. And they use sentence frames and occasional prompting to ask and answer those questions. And finally, students will give each other feedback. They describe the language speakers use to present and support their ideas, and they also describe elements of the illustrations. So each objective from day 1 through day 8 becomes a language objective. And because of the interconnected nature of the ELD and ELA standards and the way the instruction is described in the framework, it goes together to be a seamless class where she doesn't have to pull a group aside and do a specific language lesson on a different inauthentic text, but it's right related to what they're doing not only in science, but during ELA and ELD. And finally, how can you use this data? So they compare, the next level to this story is she came back with her napkin and she explained it to her grade level partners, and they said to her, "Oh yeah, that sounds great. Tell us how that goes," because they were already doing something else for ELD. So she tried it for about 2 or 3 cycles, and she kept bringing back her data to her grade level team. And finally they said, when can we do this? We want to do this too, because our kids aren't talking like that, they're not writing like that, and it's not connected to what we're doing in science or anything else in the day. And so her team members started working along with her with this. And now they compare student outcomes class to class, and they really are able to understand students' proficiency levels well beyond what they had understood in the past with CELT, and even with the new knowledge they had about the ELD standards. And they really used this as the fuel for their PLC work is around this every single week. So they use it to plan their next instructional focus. This one was focused on describing, and the next one they did was compare and contrast, which built on that. They reflect on their instructional practices. So what can they really do differently? And that was new for them as well, because they had typically had a lesson sequence and followed it. If the lesson came with sentence frames, they used it, but everyone used the same one. So it really did affect their pedagogy and how they taught. And this particular teacher too, she'll be the first one to say, she says, "I'm the most important tool in this room." And she likes to talk. And she said, "I realized that with this process, my students, when they're doing the talking, they're the ones doing the learning." In addition to that, she has 0 behavior issue during this time. Her students are 100% engaged. I mean, of course, there's an off day every now and then, but they look forward to it every day. And they're both learning language and learning science content, so it's really a win-win. So all of this is in the service of the goals of the framework that we mentioned at the beginning, which are getting kids ready for college, careers, and civic life, hoping that they can attain the capacities of literate individuals, become broadly literate, and acquire the skills for living and learning in the 21st century. This teacher tells her students all the time that the jobs that they will have, they're going to have to work together, and that's why it's important for them to collaborate on things. And they just say, "Okay," and they do it. So, and it provides them a context which is motivating, engaging, respectful, integrated, and intellectually challenging. And it reciprocally develops meaning-making, effective expression, language development, content knowledge, and foundational skills. They're working on all of those every day. And I added this, even though it's really not part of the lesson, but I just think this is so funny. He told me how he is like a skunk. Valentine. Well, I don't know. Let me see if I can get it to work.
I'm a skunk. I'm like a skunk with my stinky breath.
So, and that is why. So it's very exciting. And like I said, the kids continue to fuel the fire that was relit for this particular teacher. She, in fact, was planning to switch grade levels, and she only has a few years left to teach. And she said after what she's seen her first graders are capable of, she said she so much enjoys it, and it's intellectually challenging, motivating, integrated, and amazing for her and for her grade level team. And she said she doesn't want to quit. So it is a win-win-win all around. So I am going to open it up for questions. If you have any questions in the Q&A, you can type questions. Somebody had said that they were impressed with the kids' use of topic-specific vocabulary to communicate with precision. Does anyone have any other questions they'd like to add? Okay, we will leave the resources open and you will have access to them in a Google folder. I have all of this also in a website that you can use if you'd like to share it with someone else in a little different format. And the videos are all viewable on YouTube, so you can have access to those as soon as we get those links out to you. Oh, I have another question. Where did the 4E come from again? It's actually the 5E. It's a lesson plan that can be used in any content area, but we use it in science. And we work with the K-12 Alliance, and the teachers plan their lessons around that type of lesson forever for science. So it always starts with something called a phenomenon, and the phenomenon is something to make kids wonder about science. So oftentimes it's a picture or a video, or it could be an experience that they have, and then it builds into them. It's inquiry-based learning, so it builds into them exploring and refining and building their knowledge along the way. And the teacher gathers evidence of their learning and continues moving using that information. And then, so that would be the explore. And then the explain is where they're actually explaining their understanding. Usually that is, in my class anyway, by 5th grade. A lot of it is in their notebooks, but some of it is also conversation or presentation of their information, including research. And then it goes on to actually assessing what they have learned, and then on to elaboration, where they take it further. I have another question. Will you continue this webinar series? If so, what comes next? I have been inspired by this teacher also to try to do things the way she's been doing them with 5th graders and 4th graders during our ELD block, but I have students who have been reclassified or are English-only students but are struggling in literacy. And so we've been doing similar things, and they're coming along. So I'm working on the video aspects, and I would love to share that. Any other questions? I have another question. What types of supports does CRLP offer for reading? And actually, many of the pieces that you saw in this throughout her teaching in those 8 days, even if she couldn't put her finger on it, are from CRLP. She has been trained in Rally and in Frontloading, which is an older program, and she uses those as she's planning. Now, in addition to that, there's also support for foundational skills, which she does separately and wasn't part of this video, but is actually another part of her day, and that would be another support that CRLP offers for reading. So foundational skills and then comprehension and language. And Rally is a program that works on comprehension, and it is about academic language and literacy instruction, and it is focused on pieces of text and taking students through it, asking them questions and building their understanding before, during, and after reading. And it's really a planning tool for teachers to attack complex text. And yes, they had, these teachers also had a little bit of a taste of the ELD training that CRLP offers as well. I had the opportunity to take them through the ELD standards, and they have some experience with them. But I will say that the combination of those aspects together really helped them better understand the framework, because they didn't, these teachers also use results. So their foundational skills assessments and instruction. So they understand what that theme is in the themes of the framework, and they understand how it works together with the other parts to make students able to understand and communicate. Okay, are there any last questions? All righty, I'm going to close the questions and we will wrap this up. There will be plenty of resources for you available in the Google folder, and you will have emailed to you links to both these videos, the website that contains the videos, and a video of this webinar. And I will also share with you you have the NGSS standard and her framework, the structure that she uses to plan. But I have in addition to that, some other resources that she uses as well. And I'll put those all in the folder for you. And I love the videos. To me, the videos sell it. I could talk all day about how great it is, but when you just listen to the kids, it really shows you what it is. So it's great. Thank you all, and have a great afternoon.